Hi, everybody. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. I am wrapping up a very interesting week, another very interesting week in my life, and with Greg and Carol Olson and Bible Expeditions, some people that they brought to Israel. Greg and Carol I've known already for years, and we've done other groups together. I finally convinced Greg to sit down, Pastor Greg, to sit down, and for us to have, I think, a more in-depth talk about the life that he's leading, the teaching that he's doing, and how I think that it relates to a lot of us from any different religion and the search that we're all making, the journey that we're all on for faith and for God. And so it has been absolutely my privilege this week. We got one more day. This is being taped on Wednesday night. We've got one more day together, and it's always great for me to be with you guys. And I always learn a lot. And once again, the tremendous privilege to be, a Jew living in Israel, living in the Holy Land, and to feel like, I'm fulfilling a prophecy is just the most amazing thing. And to be able to share the Tanakh for my listeners, that's my part of the week that we have together. I do the Tanakh, I do Israel, the geography, the modern history. We spent today on the Golan Heights having chocolate and looking into Syria. And then Greg does the New Testament and the sources for the group. So thank you so much for agreeing to sit down with me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here.
So I know a little bit of your story over the years. Different things have come out. First of all, what is the name? Everyone's into labels. So what would you say is the name of the denomination or the church of which you are a part?
Well, the denomination that we ended up joining, we kind of went shopping for one, if you will, is Seventh-day Baptist. And we aren't necessarily exactly like the rest of Seventh-day Baptists, but the way Seventh-day Baptists work is outside a core set of beliefs you're required to have in common. You're allowed to have differences outside of that as long as they're biblically supported positions. Okay,
so what are the core set of beliefs? Because when I tell people, I'm going out for a week with Seventh-day Baptists, they're like, oh, no, you mean Adventists. And I say, no, I'm Seventh-day Baptist.
Yeah, so a lot of people make that mistake. They always hear Adventist when you say Baptist. Actually, the Seventh-day Baptists are a couple hundred years older than the Adventists. Seventh-day Baptists start in the 1600s in England. It's part of the separatist movement in England, same group, same movement that the Pilgrims kind of, in a sense, were a part of, breaking away from the Church of England. So as we were looking for a church, or a denomination, we looked at ones that we could work with, knowing that we believe in the Sabbath. Many other Christian denominations do not. So actually, Seventh-day Baptists, they have 10 core principles, and I'm not going to remember them off the top of my head because it's just, I don't have a memory quite like that. But it's stuff that 9 of the 10 are things that a typical Baptist church are going to believe. I mean, it's things like we believe that the Bible is the inerrant Word of God. We believe in the virgin birth. We believe Jesus Christ is God. That His death is what can bring about salvation if you repent from your sins and put your faith in Him. It's the basics. The only difference is the 10th item, which is that we believe that the biblical day of rest, the Sabbath, is the seventh day, Saturday, like it's been from creation, that there's not been a change to Sunday.
So what should be the big deal for people? You're still professing Christianity like an average Christian would do, although I've learned from you guys that there's no such thing as an average Christian, just like there is no such thing as an average Jew. Why does it seem to bother people that you would move it back to Shabbat from Sunday?
Actually, Seventh-day Baptists weren't the first denomination we went to, and I will leave one of the other ones unnamed. But we went to another denomination that is very similar to Seventh-day Baptists in that they have this core set of a few beliefs, and as long as you're with them on that, outside of that, you're fine. And I actually called the development director for church planting in our region and said, hey, what would you think of, I'd like to partner with you, start a church, and we're going to meet on Saturday. And he said, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, because it's the Sabbath. And he said, oh, so you're a legalist. Now, I know from talking to you before, that's a Christianese word. So for your listeners that are not coming from a Christianese background, that's a very dirty word that you call someone that is your kind of enemy in the faith. Essentially, what it is supposed to mean is that a legalist is someone who is trying to earn their salvation through good works instead of putting their faith in Christ and the sacrifice he made for us. So instead, you are trying to, by legal means, by putting it in Jewish parlance, you are doing the mitzvot in order to earn yourself salvation. Unfortunately, what the word really ends up meaning is you keep more of the laws than I do. Because really, Christians keep most of the laws. Most of them would be pretty horrified if they realized how many of them they do keep.
Well, why should they be horrified by keeping laws? I mean, like in Judaism, we have this enormous number, 613 mitzvot, which most of us don't keep because for most of it's not even relevant. It has to do with the temple. It has to do with priests. It has to do with a whole lot of other things. But we like to feel that we're keeping as many as possible. But you're saying that there are Christians who are saying we should keep as few as possible, or the more you keep, the worse it is?
Right. So there's this idea within Christianity that the law has been done away with, which that is often said, but they don't really believe that because they don't think murder's okay. And so, some of them will say, well, fine, we have to keep the 10 Commandments. Well, yeah, Sabbath is in there. And then they'll say, well, but that got changed to Sunday. And so there's all these like weird little loopholes that they throw in to change things. And it's just seen as a threat. Carol and I talk about kind of the big three. There's a few maybe more than this, but most Christians keep most of the commandments that would apply to them even, in the times of Moses, but 3 of them. And those 3 would be the Sabbath, dietary restrictions, and the biblical festivals. And really that's the main difference between us and most Christians. We still believe, just like, we're Seventh-day Baptists, is what our church is. We still believe in salvation is completely through Christ. But we also believe that, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so Jesus himself said that he did not come to do away with the commandments. And so, again, there's all these ways that they have to explain those things away. But to me, it was always like, it's mental gymnastics to kind of get all this done. And so for me, one of the questions I remember struggling with while I was in Bible college, and I remember asking my professors is, well, how do we know, like, which ones we're supposed to keep and which ones we can do away with, And I got these varying answers from, well, if it gets re-mentioned in the New Testament, then we do it. And I would ask, because I was told, well, by these same professors, you can't hold any position unless you can back it up with 2 to 3 verses in the Bible. And they pointed back to, even in the Torah, where it says that by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, all facts are established. So I said, well, great, cool. What are your verses that tell us if it doesn't get re-mentioned, we can ignore it? And they tell me, well, there isn't a verse for that. That's my theology. Well, but you're the one who told me you can't have theology without verses to back it up. Or, some of them would say, well, the ceremonial laws have been done away with. We only need to keep the moral laws. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, what verses tell you which is which category? And it turns out that everyone basically decides whatever they want to in any other category. So, like, when I met with this first denomination to talk to them, and he called me a legalist, I kind of tried to gently bring up this conversation of, well, why are you calling me that? I said, I honestly don't understand. You're calling me legalistic because I want to keep this one of the 10 commandments to honor the Sabbath. Am I a legalist if I'm faithful to my wife? Am I a legalist if I refrain from murdering someone when they make me angry? Why does keeping this one make me a legalist? It didn't make sense to me. It's the same questions I had back in college. It doesn't make sense. It seemed like I said, mental gymnastics to get to where they were at for me. I didn't know what to do with it, but it didn't make sense. It took many years for me to kind of get to the point where, I got some additional teaching. I ended up then looking into ancient sources myself because I don't like taking people's words for things. I want to see the proof myself.
Just something that you said a couple minutes ago reminds me of certain Jews who are also have taken kind of the moral essence out of, from Judaism and are leaving the legalities. Like, well, I don't have to keep kosher and I don't have to keep Shabbat, and I can do that as long as I'm a good person. But there are certain things that, according to Judaism, you're supposed to be doing. And so there's a lot of picking and choosing there. So what's your background, though? I mean, if you made these choices, then you were not raised in this way. So what is your background, and and how did you you said you went to, Bible college. How did you get to this place?
So I jokingly tell people I'm a mutt. My dad was Assemblies of God, which is a very Pentecostal branch of Christianity. My mom was a very conservative Lutheran growing up. So they got married, and there was kind of this trying to find a place where the family could go. And so at different times growing up, we went to an evangelical Lutheran church. We went to an evangelical free church, been to a Covenant church, a Baptist church, and I guess maybe it did shape me in the sense of I got to see that there is good in all of these groups, and there is things I can agree with on all of them, and I can see that there's things that other ones are lacking from the others and could learn from each other. And so I guess when it came to time to go to college, I had no desire to go into being a pastor at all. That was not my plan. I went to Bible college because I wanted to learn the Bible better, and I didn't care about what my future profession would be. That was not on my mind at all, but I wanted to understand more.
Okay. So, and then you go into Bible college and you have like all these different questions. Just a little, excuse my ignorance, but I'm sure a lot of my Jewish listeners are also ignorant, so I feel like I'm in good company. When you talk about your parents being from different churches, how does that play out at home? Meaning, like in Judaism, if you have somebody who's maybe conservative or reform who's marrying Orthodox, there's some very serious issues because a lot of it has to do with the home. Is you keeping kosher in the house? Is the family driving on the Sabbath? So in that, it's very difficult in a Jewish home to have the parents, even though it's done. I see it done here in Israel. Is the wife going to the mikvah, to the ritual bath? Are the laws of family purity being kept? It's difficult to do that in a house, especially how you're raising the kids. But how does that work in Christianity, where you have less of these day-to-day things? Is it just a belief system that's different, or like, is Christmas celebrated on different days? Is it celebrated differently? Are you keeping biblical holidays? Are you not? On a practical level, what went on in the house?
Really, on a day-to-day level, it makes no difference. In a sense, the biggest difference you would notice would be if you went to a worship service at one versus the other. So when you go to at least the Assemblies of God church that I spent some of my youth in, the pastor was in a suit and tie when he's up at the pulpit. At the Lutheran church, the pastor would wear a robe, or as my dad would say, a dress, because he didn't grow up with that. It was foreign to him. It was hard for him to see past that. He's like, what?
A frock.
Right. And, maybe you'd have, it's funny, I didn't even know this until a couple years ago, but I guess when we were at the Lutheran church, they have much more sort of traditional things where there's a cloth they place across the altar which is just kind of behind the pastor, and it changes depending on the season. I had no idea that even happened. I went to the church and it was in the background. I never noticed it. Mm-hmm. My mom is now part of the altar guild, though, and that's where I learned about it, because she talks about changing the cloth. We have to change the cloth to purple now because it's whatever it is. That's not something I recall growing up. I was more looking at other things. But at home, not much difference really at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, the core beliefs are really the same. And that's where, I can see little good points about each of them, but really they're not radically different as some people might think. Okay,
so the step that you've taken, which is moving the Sabbath back to Shabbat, and one of the places that we went to was Shiloh, where the tabernacle was during the period of the Judges, and spoke a lot about Shabbat. I mean, and I was, we've had some great conversations over the week. I remember years ago, I asked you why you had taken me as an Orthodox Jew to guide your group. And you just looked at me and said, well, where else am I going to learn the Tanakh and learn the way Jesus lived? I mean, the Jewish world in which he lived, which was really for me like the first understanding that the search that some Christians are on, again, to find the context of his life, and maybe finding that through understanding Israel and through understanding Jews. Because as you know, because we also went to Yad Vashem, there is a fraught and very difficult history between Jews and Christians over the last 1,500 years, and a lot of persecutions of the Jews by the Christians, and a lot of still, I would say, if not anger, then definitely mistrust on the Jewish side of Christians and of, what your goal is here. And I've had some people say to me, well, how can you work with Christians like they're going to convert you? So I'm secure enough in my belief system that that's not going to happen totally. But we're able in that you're secure where you are, I'm secure where I am. And we're able to really find the commonalities and, agree to disagree on a lot of things. And for me, that's really, I have to thank you for that, because that's an opportunity that I really have not had in my life to do that. And I appreciate that very much, like that honesty, that trust, and that what you're getting from me, and I know what I'm getting from you. And I wish that more people had the opportunity to do that. I wish there was more of a chance of doing that without the suspicion and without the, the lingering bad feelings. And hopefully, we're getting to that point. But so getting back to, let's say, like the biblical holidays and Shabbat. So what does Shabbat look like for you now? Because again, Shabbat for me, like I didn't guide you guys on Shabbat. You knew Friday at like noon, I was gone, saw you Sunday morning. And you guys did your own thing on Shabbat. And you know that for me, Shabbat, that 25 hours, I am in a different zone in every single way. So how do you take that on in your church or as a Seventh-day Baptist? What makes Shabbat now special? Because I have told you this also. I've had conversations with different pastors over the years who've said to me, the Christians never really got it when it came to the Sabbath, like going to church, Sunday morning, and then we go to the game or we take the kids somewhere. It's just not the Sabbath, the way, the atmosphere that you guys have. So what do you do now to create some of that special atmosphere of the seventh day, of the day of rest, of the day of not creating? What do you do on a practical level?
Okay, so our halacha is going to be different. Coming from a Jewish perspective, you have the sages to look to and things like that. As Christians, we don't accept that as authoritative. And we do instead take the words of Jesus as authoritative. And so really it's kind of a little bit unexplored territory. And so that's part of the reason why it's even great to be around you, to just see kind of some of the stuff you guys do. And again, I'm not threatened by it. I'm not, thinking it's a threat at all. But as Christians, we people say, oh yeah, we do our Sabbath on Sunday. And like you said, no, they don't. I mean, it's like they'll go out to eat after church and then go shopping for, paint and then a backpack for the kids because their other one wore out, that sort of thing. It's like, that's not the Sabbath. So, we've tried to just look back at what does the Bible tell us? What do we say? Like you look at the, you look at the exiles returning from Babylon and you have the vendors that are coming to buy and sell in Jerusalem, and they're told, no, we're not doing that anymore. Basically, get out or I'm going to beat you up, sort of thing. And so it's like, okay, commerce, that's out. I get that. Okay, what else do we know? Okay, you shall not work. Okay, so working's out. Certainly, my job. Before we came to this, I used to work 7 days a week, and that came to an end. Looking at biblically, the days are sundown to sundown. So Sabbath is sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, and that's the time I cease from work. So, as a practical thing for me, it's like, besides being a pastor and bringing tours over to Israel, I have a day job besides that. And it means that they know that, especially come winter, as the days are shorter, that Friday, Greg's not going to be there all day. So it's kind of a learning process and a refining process and going through and trying to figure out what did Jesus do. And Jesus talks about a few different things. I mean, it's funny for me now as a pastor. When we first came to the Sabbath for a number of years, I was not a pastor at that point, and Sabbath was easier, if you will. But now as a pastor, Sabbath sometimes I feel like I work the hardest that day of the week in a sense.
Yeah, that's what we say about the rabbis. They're actually the ones who work on Shabbat because that's when they have to go to synagogue and lead the service.
Right. Yeah. And Jesus kind of addressed that. He said that the priests break the Sabbath, yet they are without guilt, because that's what they're called to do. And so for me, it doesn't look quite the same as it once did. But you know what? Usually every Sabbath, when church is finally done, we go home. I take a nap. That's almost kind of the beginning of Sabbath for me. And then I'm not watching TV, trying to get away from the cares of the world. I mean, that's kind of what it looks like.
And you also said some dietary laws you keep?
Right. So the halakha is different. So we don't eat foods that are unclean. I don't have a problem eating a cheeseburger. I don't really happen to like them. Okay. I like the flavor of a hamburger and I like the flavor of cheese. Just don't put them together.
Good. That makes me feel better because I've never had one. So good. I'm not missing anything.
No, not really. I don't think so. But I would not have a problem with something like that. I understand, where that comes from. And this is one of the other things that, in going to all of this and really studying Judaism to learn more about Jesus, because Jesus is a Jew. And so, I have several volumes from the Babylonian Talmud that I refer to in things, because I'm trying to learn what is Jesus's audience, what are they thinking, what's the background they're coming from. And so I understand the idea of building fences around the Torah. And in a sense, while Jesus, that was some of the conflict he had sometimes with the Pharisees, was over some of those. I admire the fact about Jews that they have chosen to do that, because I think sometimes there's an attitude in Christianity. There's this idea in Christianity, we call it cheap grace. And it's the idea that, well, because I have faith in Jesus and he saved me, I can do whatever I want now. I can go out and just, rape and pillage and everything's fine because I'm all good. And so then there's this attitude sometimes in Christianity where the question is asked, how close can I get before it's sin? Like how far can I go? How close can I get? The easiest explanation is usually like when young people are dating. Well, how close to having sex can I get without it being, bad? And so I really respect the fact that Judaism has such an honor for God that it's like, no, how far away can I get from sin? And I really think that's something that Christianity could learn from the Jews in this.
Mm-hmm. So the third thing is, you said the biblical festivals. So Passover, Sukkot, you fast on Yom Kippur?
Yes, I fast on Yom Kippur. We keep the other festivals. Again, they're going to look different, and partly it's because we're stumbling our way through this and we don't have a tradition. When we first started, actually, my wife didn't want any tradition. She said, we're going to do only what's written in the Bible and nothing else. Okay. And the problem we quickly realized with that is that you couldn't tell any of them apart, because it was, okay, we don't work this day. How does this... I mean, like Thanksgiving, you have turkey. That's what makes it Thanksgiving, right? It's like 4th of July, you have like potato salad and you're grilling... Yeah, and fireworks and you're grilling out. So if you don't have certain tradition, if you will, there's nothing to differentiate them. So... we've been developing some of that and looking to what Jews do, and also trying to figure out what did Jesus and his disciples do, and trying to figure out how can we make this special.
So like no bread on Passover?
So right, we clear the house of leaven before Passover, and don't have any for the the week of unleavened bread, and again anything that's biblical. So our I wouldn't even really call it a Passover Seder, but our Passover that we celebrate, it's fairly simple. We look down and it's like, well, what do you have to have? You have to have lamb. It has to be roasted over fire. If there's any left, it has to be burned up. You have to have bitter herbs. You have to tell the story.
So what story do you tell? Do you use the Passover Haggadah like the Jews would use? Is it we left Egypt? How does that work at the Seder? Just out of kids, it just jumps into my head here.
This is just the way we've happened to do it. I let Charlton Heston tell the story. Actually, we usually watch the 10 Commandments, and then actually as part of it too, then we do talk about, because Paul in 1 Corinthians talks about Jesus being our Passover lamb. He's crucified at Passover. So then we do have what most Christians would call communion or the Lord's Supper. So we do incorporate that into the meal also.
And then you also keep the Christian holidays, or you keep the festivals instead? Do you still do Christmas? Do you still do Easter?
Now I'm going to get labeled a heretic for sure.
We were going there anyway. Whoever's still listening, now it gets fun.
So, all right. So here's the thing. Christmas and Easter are pagan. Bottom line, if you look into history, that's okay. So Easter, we talked about this actually a little bit when we were up at Tel Dan with the group. And the fact of the matter is, the reason Easter is celebrated when it is anti-Semitism. It's clear from the scriptures Jesus is crucified at Passover. He rises on first fruits. Constantine comes along and says, we hate the Jews. We don't want to use their calendar to celebrate this holy thing, so we're going to change the date. The problem with that is, and you know, people call them, whenever people find out we do these festivals, they say, well, why are you doing the Jewish festivals? And I like to tell them, have you ever read Leviticus 23? It starts out and God says, these are my festivals. And he says, which you, speaking to the children of Israel, are to publicly proclaim, but they belong to God. So I tell people, it's not the Jewish festivals. They're God's festivals. And he says you are specifically in Leviticus 23 to celebrate them on the days I tell you. So Constantine comes along and says, we hate the Jews, we're going to change the date. Well, how's that any different than what Jeroboam did when he says, oh yeah, I'm going to change the date of the festival too. And we see that as being evil as Christians, but there's not that connection made with when it comes to Easter. And Christmas, I mean, it's hard. So Carol and I don't really celebrate it as things ourselves. Like, okay, so our families will invite us over. We go to be with our families. It's different for us now. It's more of just we're getting together with our family. I mean, like Christmas, there is no way possible Jesus is born on December 25th. Can't happen. You read the gospel accounts, it doesn't make sense, especially when you know the land here, because it talks about the sheep being in the fields with the shepherds. The shepherds are only in the fields, and the word used there in the Greek is where in English we get our word for agriculture, and it means cultivated land. If you have sheep grazing in cultivated land in December, you don't eat in the spring because they're eating your freshly planted grain. The only time you have sheep in your fields are after Shavuot, after Pentecost, and before you start replanting, so around a little bit after Sukkot maybe. So Jesus has to be born sometime between, say, June and October. There's no way it's in December. So again, we don't want to hurt people. We you know, so we'll go where we're invited and that sort of thing. We've never really said anything. My mom, well, I love my mom, but she has my number. Like, she figures me out like right away.
She's your mom.
Yeah. So it was like last year she comes by and she bought us a Festivus pole. You know, from Seinfeld. There was you're familiar with that one? So you're familiar with Seinfeld though.
I'm familiar. I don't watch much TV, but I've watched a couple of Seinfelds. Yes, I know I'm a terrible person. Don't send me letters. I know.
So George Costanza, I mean, they're all Jewish, but George Costanza's dad decides he doesn't want anything to do with Christmas or Hanukkah, but everyone's celebrating this time of year, so he creates his own festival. And he says, Festivus for the rest of us is kind of his thing.
A Festivus for the rest of us.
And they celebrate by just, instead of like a Christmas tree, they put up an aluminum pole. And my mom buys me this Festivus pole, and she comes by and drops it off, and she goes, I know you don't celebrate Christmas, so I thought I'd give you a Festivus pole.
Wow. She sounds cool, though. Yeah. Like, she's got it. She's at least supporting you on that level. So my listeners didn't see, because this is radio, how uncomfortable you got when I asked you that. Because I know that, look, you're living in a Christian country. America's a Christian country. But you're on your search with the core of that. But, you know, one of the things that's interesting for me is that you don't call it the Old Testament and the New Testament. You call it the Older Testament and the Newer Testament. And you're making a clear line between the pre and the post. And that without understanding what I call Tanakh and Bible and others call the Old or Older Testament, you can't possibly understand the origins of Christianity. It's amazing to me, though, and I'm sure even more to you, how many Christians do exactly that. that when I'm guiding, let's say, Catholics here, for the most part, they do not know Tanakh. They actually have a tough time even realizing that Jesus was a Jew. Like, I'll take them to a synagogue and say, well, this is where tradition has it. He preached in there, but we're in a synagogue. Yeah, well, there were no churches then. There is no Christianity then. He's living in a Jewish world. And you and Carol have made a tremendous effort now to come to Israel and come back with other people, because without understanding the land and without understanding the context, not just of his Jewish world, but the land of Israel and the places, that are what's going on here in the first century, it's impossible to understand what he's saying. And this is what's important to you. So, like, we had a bunch of examples this week, actually many examples, where I heard you saying to everyone in the group, so when he's saying this, then he's assuming that everybody knows something, so he doesn't have to say it because they just know that. But we don't know that because most of us don't realize the context of the people that he's talking to. I don't know if you want to just give one example now of that.
Well, one that we didn't even talk about this week, but that people use, is there's a passage where Jesus has a confrontation with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees ask, why are your disciples eating with unwashed hands? It refers to the ceremonial, I don't know what you want to call it. It might call it right there, the ceremonial hand.
Well, right, because we traditional Jews wash our hands with a special prayer before we eat bread. Right.
And so Jesus' disciples weren't doing that. And Jesus has this thing where he says, well, whatever a man eats, it goes into his stomach and it passes out. And it doesn't really matter if his hands are dirty or clean or whatever. And then it says in the one gospel, and by saying this, Jesus declared all foods to be clean. Yeah. Who's his audience? Jews. Pig isn't food to a Jew. I mean, how far are you gonna take that then? Cannibalism's okay then? Because, there's certain assumptions underlying this. He's talking to Jewish people, and if he's declaring all food to be clean, the context is he's talking about washing hands. He's not talking about what constitutes food. Everyone there that he's talking to agrees. Pork isn't food. Neither is shellfish.
Right. And there were many, many other examples that came up this week that I think we were able to, open the eyes of some of the people who were here. Okay, so Greg, one of the big things for you is actually bringing people here to Israel. That's why you and Carol started this organization, Bible Expedition, because as you've said to me, in order to really understand the Bible, you have to see the land and as the context to the biblical stories. So how do you feel that that's playing out in terms of the groups that you brought here? Do you feel that that's successful, that people are getting it, the experiences that we've had in the last week?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I got some feedback just tonight that one of the women on the trip was saying how she's excited to go home and read the Bible more. And really that's, I want this to be my livelihood to pay the bills, but it's like, that's like so much beyond. If you can change someone's life like that, it's better than anything. Yeah.
No, I have that not just with your group, but with other people that I'll guide, because I always have the Tanakh with me. The best thing someone can say to me at the end of a trip was, I never thought that book was really relevant, or was just some stories that, was Ark, which is cute for kindergartens or whatever. It's a quaint story. But now when you learn it in the land, you realize that it's so relevant. The personalities in there, the stories that happen, the issues of leadership and the messages that the Bible are giving are maybe even more relevant than ever. And that, I want to go home and pick up a Tanakh and start learning it again. That's an amazing feeling, because it is a tremendous book that for a long time was almost sectorial, just speaking from the Jewish world, that there's a lot of Jews who feel that the Tanakh only belongs to religious Jews. We read it, we read the Bible on Saturdays, and no, it belongs to all of us. It was a book that it's still it's still the world's bestseller, right, of all books. So clearly, there's a message in there for everybody. So, so how do you do that? Do you read Bible? Do you give Bible lessons at home? And now you're coming here and showing where it happened and why it happened like this and the context.
Yeah, at this point. I still do have a day job besides this, right. But we do send, before we come, we send each of the people that's coming on the trip an itinerary, and not just an itinerary of where you're going, but a list of passages in the Bible that relate to that site. And we ask people to read that before they come here. And really the thing I tell people is the more you know before you get here, the more you will get out of your trip. And then, when we're on the sites, we read from the Bible and do some teaching. And you and I are tag teaming this. And I think it makes for a good partnership. People are, we're bringing over Christians, but the Tanakh is something that we share. You with your knowledge of the land, with all of that stuff, and Tanakh, you can bring in all of that expertise. And really, sadly, most Christians, even though Tanakh makes up 2/3 of the Christian Bible, are completely ignorant of it.
So what's important to me, and I hope I succeeded in doing, is also explaining why certain events happened in a certain place, like in Tel Dan, for example, right, where the tribe of Dan is going, and but it's up near the headwaters of the Jordan, so you're always going to have people living there because there's water. It's always going to be a fought-over area. That the kingdom of Israel is, because it's near the highway, the ancient highway, is always going to be subject to different cultures and idolatry at the time, more than Judah, which is a little more protected and kind of tucked away, and so is going to be, less exposed to that. And so therefore, like when the Bible talks about the kings of Israel were much more easily led down, into idolatry, much more than the kings of Judah, you can actually put that in a physical place and explain why. Well, the Phoenicians are right there with Baal, and so is right there with their gods. And so, there's that danger as well. So, having said that, this conversation, for example, I'm imagining that some of the listeners on both sides are having questions about this conversation, because having, like what I just said about, let's say, the Israelites and being exposed. So there might be Jews who are listening to this and saying, like, Eve, what are you doing? You're exposing yourself to Christians. You're with them all week. What if they now want to, convert you? And I would imagine that there might be some people listening to you and saying, like, what are you doing? You're actually getting to know a Jew, and maybe that's not so good from where you're sitting. So we've been talking about this extensively, and also because I've known you for years, and this comes up. So how are you seeing this? I can answer how I'm seeing this, but since I'm interviewing you, I'll let you go first.
Well, one of the things is just, we even bring this up, when we're putting our group together, we say, hey, we have an Orthodox Jewish guide. And Christians sometimes kind of recoil in horror, and I tell them, look, Jesus was Jewish. And we just simply, especially in the United States, in the Western world, we have so not been taught, any of that. And as a result, we misunderstand much of what Jesus said simply because we don't understand the background. And his background is Jewish. So, I see it as a very valuable connection, having the two of us together. And as far as, converting Jews to Christianity, if a Christian takes the Bible seriously, they want to convert everyone to Christianity. It's not just Jews, it's everybody. And it's, you and I have talked about this before. It's not out of seeing that there's something wrong with Judaism. It's, if we believe our text seriously, if we take it seriously, it tells us that people who do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah have no share in the world to come. So, as a person, if I see someone else walking into a road and there's a truck coming, they don't see it coming, like, what kind of person am I if I don't warn them? And so it's if we truly take it seriously that the Bible says that in the Newer Testament that, you must confess Jesus Christ and you will be saved, and we care about other people, it's not out of hate, it's not out of anything like that, it's out of compassion, it's out of, like, how could I not do this?
So I've gotten that it's because you like me that you want me to be saved, and you feel that I can only be saved if I can become a Christian. And I think that it's been interesting for you to see that, first of all, I'm not going there. And as I even said to you before, the more I learn about Christianity, the stronger of a Jew I become. Okay, it's just not. It's not a doctrine. It's not a religion that appeals to me in any way. And the more I appreciate my Jewish world, but I mean, you mentioned something to me that somebody said, somebody on the group said about me, which I mean, if you don't mind telling the audience, because I think that just if you can repeat that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I had one of the participants on the tour kind of come and say to me, I really enjoyed meeting Eve, but it's kind of caused a crisis of faith for me, sort of, because, here now I've met this person that is so sincere in their faith and is everything that a Christian strives to be in their life, and she's not a Christian. And it's like, how do I cope with this? What do I deal with this? How do I process this?
So I'm very glad that I put him or her in that position, and because it makes me feel good that I'm considered a good person, and also because I do feel that some antisemitism, and the Jews have suffered tremendously from Christian antisemitism, has come about because that idea that maybe Jews aren't good people, and so it's okay to be nasty to them because they're not good people. So it's no big deal. And if she is having a problem because they think I am a good person, so how does that fit with also being Jewish? Then I think that that's a great place that I put him or her. All right. Because I think that maybe to finally get past that, that's what we need to do, is also to be able to understand this person completely believes differently than I do. But they could still be a good person. They could still represent God in the world, which ultimately I think should be the common ground here, is that there are people who believe in God and see God in the world, either through nature or through history or through both. And there are people who don't. And so maybe the commonalities now between people of faith is joining on that, is not arguing with each other about the intricacies of the faith. Do you believe in Jesus, that you'll get saved or whatever, but more like trying to say to the world, because there's a whole lot of people who have no faith at all of any religion. And that personally makes me sad. I see so many Jews who have left God. Not that even though they're going to Christianity, they've just left God. And I know that you're seeing it, where you are as well. So maybe the real fight here should be about people seeing that there's a bigger picture than we are. There's a bigger force than we are. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, again, as a Christian, if you take your faith seriously, you need to try and convince everyone that Jesus is the Messiah. And it's great to cooperate with others, things like that. We also, to begin our trip, we had Rabbi Pesach Wolacki from the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation. He came and met with us too, and he stresses kind of what we have in common. But there is going to be this thing at the end of the day where Christians, if they take their faith seriously, and if they take the Newer Testament seriously, there is this requirement that, you can't just sit by and accept people having a different worldview. And unfortunately, that has taken horrible anti-Semitic turns in the past. Persecution of Jews, the writings of Martin Luther end up being twisted and which are messed up anyway. His writings against the Jews, end up being used in the Holocaust. Christianity has some things to deal with there in its past, and has certainly done wrong. But being faithful to what is in the Christian Bible does involve trying to convince people that Jesus is the Messiah.
So there'll be some people who are listening probably who are saying, okay, Eve, so they're not coming you with the sword now, right? But they're now trying to hug you into Christianity. Like by being nice people and friendly people, they're trying to get you in there. So my answer to that, I'm going to give the answer to that, is that as Jews, we need to strengthen our beliefs. All right. Nobody is going to convince you of something if you are very strong in what you believe. And we've done a bunch of tours together and spent a lot of time together. And you are definitely no closer, to getting me to become a Christian than you were the first time we met. Because I am very strong in my beliefs and who I am. And I think that I respect where you're coming from. I don't know if respect is the right word. I understand where you're coming from as a Christian and why that's a part of it, even though it's not a part of Judaism, at least the way I understand Judaism, is not to go out and convert everybody to Judaism. And we don't believe that God only loves the Jews and they'll only be saved if you're a Jew. We've got a special role to play in the world. But other people have their role to play as well. And something that we've spoken about is like, when I think about who's brought the Bible to the world, to South America and to Africa and to places that had maybe idol worshiping or pagan societies and are now, we've been seeing it all through this week, right? Everywhere we go, there's like Nigerians and Brazilians, and it's like, whoa, the whole world has come to Israel, and a lot of them with Bibles in their hand. And it's not because of the Jews, because we didn't go out there and spread the Bible around. It's because of the Christians. So that's kind of a little bit interesting with all that the Christians have done to the Jews that hasn't been positive. On the other hand, a lot of people know the Bible because of the Christians. So these are not easy answers either. I've learned to live with those tensions of, why certain things happen that didn't seem to make sense. A lot of things. Judaism's coming from a very different place when it comes to that. So for me, like, I have absolutely no need to sit here and convince you of Judaism. I love teaching the Bible. I love going to the places, like some of the places we went to this week, like Chatzor, where there's these huge battles that are going on with Joshua, and later on, and just to stand there and then everybody's looking around and we're reading from the Bible and, so they were coming from there and like, wow. And there's this burnt layer here, which people who are denying the Bible wish had never been found, that could talk about the destruction. And for me, it just is for people to realize that the Tanakh actually happened and that it happened in a place and it happened in this place and that I get to live here and I feel like I'm living out a prophecy is just for me like so totally overwhelming. And if that in any way shows faith in God, that, that for your group, is like, it makes them at least understand where the Jews are coming from, then for me, that's like a huge thing that I'm privileged to do.
Yeah, it kind of connecting the ideas. Rabbi Willeke talked about the fact that even us being here as Christians is, as he sees it, a fulfillment of prophecy. Mm-hmm. That he talks about the nations coming to Jerusalem to worship the God of Israel, and that's why we're here. Right. So it's and tying it back to what we talked about earlier. I believe there's even a prophetic element to that when you read in Zechariah about 10 men from among the nations grasping the hem of a Jewish man's garment. And what's on the hem, the tzitzit. Mm-hmm. And what does that represent? The commandments, which Christianity has abandoned. So yeah, I do feel it's prophetic, and our partnership works because in Bible Expeditions we're trying to educate people about the Bible, and there's 2/3 of it that most Christians are ignorant of, and you can teach them what's there, and since it's a Christian group, I can show how that connects to the Newer Testament because, since coming to believing and keeping Torah, and I just want to mention too, is Seventh-day Baptists don't necessarily believe that in whole. Seventh-day Baptists believe in keeping the Sabbath. Some believe in like festivals, eating clean like we do, not all. But it all fits together.
So, as my listeners won't be surprised to hear, this takes me out of my comfort zone. But it helps me grow as a person. It helps me grow as a Jew and to appreciate, through your eyes also, Israel and what's happened here. And when I guide in general and I'm explaining Israel to people, then the wonder again of how far we've come and the miracles that we've seen and the fact that we've won the wars over and over and over again, it makes me, even more appreciate like what Hashem is doing for my people. And so, I hope we do this for a long time, and that people understand each other more and understand really the importance, and there's still the relevance of Tanakh in a world where I think a lot of people are, losing that and just thinking about themselves and not about a bigger picture and what we're supposed to be accomplishing here with each other, with God. So I want to thank you for the opportunity. And I've also grown this week. I really have. And not just because we ate a lot of chocolate. So I have grown on that level also. But, and I hope, I hope that the people who were on the trip, that it changes their lives. And, or it even changes their understanding of modern Israel and the role that we have to play in the friendship with America and how important Israel is, not just like, to be nice to Israel, or in Genesis it says, if you bless the Jews or whatever, then you'll be blessed through them. But because there's a real politic thing going on here of two countries with very much shared values who need to hang together in a world that's not necessarily the friendliest, shall we say. So I hope that in addition to that, I was able to give a little understanding. We went up on the Golan Heights, and we went into Metula and looked in Lebanon, and then we were on the Jordanian border, and I think there's an understanding of what's happening here as well. We went to Shiloh and to Samaria. So I hope that there was a little bit of that too. So when people even forget reading the Tanakh, reading the front page, that they are a little bit more aware of what's really happening here and not a lot of times what's reported.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things we always deal with is we're trying to encourage people to come to Israel. Is everyone's scared to come here? Oh, isn't it dangerous? And again, talking to someone just this evening from our trip, this person said that, there I was, looking into Syria where, a territory that ISIS held at one point. I felt totally safe.
Right.
It's...
And pretty much the only soldiers you saw this week were ordering shawarma with you in the, in the restaurant because they were hungry too. So yeah, it's so totally not what people think it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And you did a good job this week also explaining, it's all Bible. The modern stuff is Bible. It's fulfillment of prophecy. The Jewish people being brought back to their land. It's the enemies you face are your enemies since biblical times. It's all relevant and it all fits together.
I mean, feeling like I belong to people who's supposed to be a light into the nations. The hope that people realize that Israel as a country and as the Jewish country is still filling that role. And I think a lot of the hatred, very, like Airbnb, delisting and all that kind of stuff, is hatred against Israel and the Jewish people. I think to a great degree is hatred of God and of the Bible, and that definitely affects the Christians as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg Olson, for a very interesting conversation. You guys should hear what wasn't taped. Oh my God. Anyhow, all right, so that's it for now. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Thanks to Tabitha and to Ben and to everybody who puts this together. You can always write to me, eve@thelandofisrael.com. Always looking forward to hearing from you. So take care, everybody, and goodbye for now. This is Eve Harrow, host of Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Chanuka Sameach to all of our listeners who, along with us, are carrying on the Maccabees tradition of the few fighting the many forces arrayed against Hashem, His people, in our land. Let's keep our lights shining bright.